Morning light filtered through my office window, casting long shadows across the paper-strewn desk. It was a common routine, but today there was something different in the air, an almost palpable tension. While reviewing old documents, a folder labeled Thompson Heirloom caught my eye. Curious, I opened it and, to my surprise, found a document that revealed the true extent of my wife, Jessica's fortune. My heart raced. The quantity was absurd. It was an inheritance that could change not only her life, but mine as well. Wow, this is a real treasure, I muttered to myself, as a mixture of jealousy and ambition began to form in my mind. Jessica had always been the heir, but I had never paid attention to how significant that inheritance was. It was as if a door opened in my mind, revealing a path I had never considered before. I got up from my chair and started pacing back and forth, thinking about how this discovery could change everything. When Jessica entered the office, her smile lit up the room. "Mark, you won't believe what I found," I said, excitedly, without noticing the dark cloud that was beginning to form over me. "Tell me, darling," I replied, trying to hide my growing anxiety. "My dad called me. He said it's finally time for me to find out about the family inheritance. It's a huge amount, Mark. We can do so many things with it," he exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. Those words echoed in my mind. Do so many things, I thought. But the truth was that I wanted to control this fortune. "That's amazing, love. You must feel so happy," I said, trying to keep my tone enthusiastic even though my heart was in turmoil. "I am. But I'm also a little nervous. There are so many responsibilities involved," Jessica continued, looking at me with a mix of expectation and concern. "We can handle this together," I replied, trying to sound confident, but the thought of sharing this fortune began to consume me. What I really wanted was access to that money, not as a husband, but as a controller. After that conversation, my mind was filled with plans. What I needed was someone who could help me manipulate the situation to my advantage. It was then that I thought about Samantha. Our relationship had always been based on desires and secrets, and now she could become a perfect ally. That night, I arranged to meet Samantha at a discreet bar. When she arrived, she was wearing a tight red dress that accentuated her curves. The way she walked was like a dance, and I couldn't help but notice the effect she had on me. "Mark, you seem tense," she said, leaning across the table, her gaze piercing me. "I have something important to discuss," I replied, my voice low, barely above a whisper. "Jessica inherited a fortune, and I need you to help me get some of it." Samantha's eyes sparkled with interest, but there was a hint of skepticism. "And how do you plan to do that?" I explained my plan, detailing how we could manipulate the situation to our advantage. "If we can convince Jessica that she is not worthy of this inheritance or that she should use this money in a way that benefits us both, we can have complete control," I said, feeling the adrenaline rush through my veins. Samantha smiled, a smile that mixed ambition and desire. "You really are a smart man, Mark. Let's do this. Let's make sure Jessica understands who really deserves this fortune." As we spoke, the idea of cheating on her became more and more seductive. I knew I was digging a deep hole, but the desire to have it for myself was overwhelming. The night progressed, full of treacherous plans and whispered promises. What I didn't know was that every step I took towards ambition took me away from the truth and the person I truly loved. The line between love and greed was beginning to blur, and I was about to cross a line that I might never take back. The atmosphere in the house was heavy, and the morning light filtering through the curtain seemed to emphasize the growing tension between Jessica and me. As she excitedly moved around the kitchen, preparing a breakfast that would otherwise have been a peaceful, loving scene, I felt increasingly uneasy. The paper I had found, revealing her family's fortune, hung in my mind like a shadow. The words she had said the night before echoed, "We're going to have a wonderful future, Mark." The irony of the situation made me feel a knot in my stomach. "Mark, are you okay? You seem distant," Jessica said, breaking my reverie. I looked at her, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just a lot of work. You know how it is," I replied, trying to sound unconcerned. But the truth was that the idea of having access to that fortune consumed me. As we drank coffee, I decided it was time to plant the first seed of doubt. "Have you ever thought about what this inheritance could really mean for us? You know that money can change people, don't you?" I asked, watching his face. Jessica frowned, the joy that had once lit her eyes beginning to dissipate. "What do you mean by that, Mark? My family has always been close, and the inheritance is just a reflection of that. I don't want this to affect us." "But what if it does? What if the expectations of you become unbearable? Don't you feel pressured to be the perfect daughter now?" I was playing a delicate game, but the urgency for control over that inheritance emboldened me. She hesitated, looking at my face for an answer. "I don't know. I never thought of it like that. I just want you to think about us, Jess. After all, what really matters is what we have together, not what your family has, I continued, trying to make her more vulnerable. The sparkle in his eyes began to fade, and I knew I was on the right path. Later, when night came, I decided it was time to meet up with Samantha. The place chosen was a discreet bar, away from prying eyes. As soon as I entered, I saw her leaning against the counter, with a drink in her hand and a provocative smile on her face. "Mark, you're late," she said, leaning toward me. Her scent was captivating, and for a moment, I let myself be carried away by the attraction. But then the image of Jessica came to mind. "Sorry, Samantha. The situation at home is more complicated than I thought." "We need to be careful," I replied, trying to stay focused. She laughed, a sound that was both seductive and dangerous. "Careful is what you need. You don't want your wife to find out about our little arrangement, do you?" "I know that, and that's why we need to be strategic," I said, as the tension between us grew. "I'm thinking about going on a business trip. That would give us more freedom to meet without arousing suspicion." Samantha smiled, her eyes shining with an ambition that made me nervous. "Great idea, Mark. While you pretend to be busier and busier, we can meet up more. And who knows, maybe you can convince Jessica to give up part of the inheritance." I nodded, a feeling of power beginning to form within me. "Exactly. I'm going to make her feel like she needs me, that I'm the only person who can help her deal with all of this." When I returned home that night, I found Jessica sitting in the living room, with a book in her hands, but her gaze was far away. "Mark, are you thinking about traveling for work?" she asked, without looking at me. "It's a possibility, yes. But don't worry, I'll always be here for you," I replied, trying to give the impression that my loyalty was not in doubt. She smiled slightly, but the insecurity was still written on her face. "I just hope you don't walk away from me. Lately, you've been so distant." "I swear it's not that. It's just stress from work." "I love you, Jess," he said, pulling her closer. But inside, I knew I was digging a deep hole of lies and manipulation. As she cuddled in my arms, guilt began to consume me. But the desire to have that money, that security, was stronger. I needed to move forward with the plan. And so, the game began, with every move a dangerous dance between love and betrayal. I clearly remember the day the truth began to unfold like a game of cards. Sunlight streamed in through my office window, but I couldn't warm myself. The atmosphere was heavy, and I felt like a character in a drama where everything around me was starting to fall apart. I received a message from a friend of Jessica's, a warning disguised as concern that was, in essence, a cry of warning. He told me he had heard rumors about cheating. My heart quickened, but not out of genuine concern for Jessica. It was the fear that my plan was about to be exposed. That night, Jessica came home earlier than usual. The smell of her perfume, a mixture of jasmine and freshness, filled the room and, for a brief moment, I felt guilty. When she walked through the door, I was met with her inquisitive gaze. "Mark, you look different. What happened?" His voice was soft, but there was a firmness that made me hesitate. I couldn't let her see how shaken I was. "Just stress at work, honey. You know how it is," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't convinced. "I heard some things," she started, but I was already prepared. "Things? What do you mean by that?" I needed to divert the conversation, and the best defense was an attack. "You know how people are, always making up stories. Don't let it get to you." She looked at me suspiciously, but didn't want to get into an argument. "I just worry, Mark. You've been so distant. I feel like there's something you're not telling me." "Jessica, I promise there is nothing to fear. Let's go for a walk, what do you think? Some fresh air will do us both good." I tried to muster a smile, but her expression didn't change. I knew I needed to act quickly. When she walked away to get her coat, I took the opportunity to send a message to Samantha. "We need to accelerate the plan. Jessica is starting to suspect everything." The urgent tone of the message was a reflection of my state of mind. Samantha responded almost immediately, a spark of ambition in her words. "Mark, this is the time to act. If you don't do this soon, you could lose everything. Think about what you've always wanted." I couldn't let that happen. The future I dreamed of, a life of luxury and power alongside Samantha, depended on a single move. But the guilt was starting to weigh on me. What was I about to do to Jessica? She didn't deserve this. The next morning, while drinking coffee, Jessica turned to me with a determined look. "Mark, I need to know the truth. You're seeing another woman, aren't you?" The shock of the words hit me like a punch in the gut. How could she know? "This is ridiculous, Jessica. You're hearing rumors. I love you, and you know it," I tried to argue, but doubt had already settled in his mind. "I don't want to live in this uncertainty anymore. If you really love me, prove it. If not, then, perhaps we should reconsider our marriage." The pain in his voice was palpable, and I knew I was losing control. "You don't have to worry about any of that. Let's solve this together," I lied, holding his hand. But inside, I was panicking. Meanwhile, Samantha pressed for answers. "You will need to act, Mark. We can't let her control you like this. If you don't do something soon, you could miss out on having everything you ever wanted." Her words were like poison, and I knew I needed to make a choice, between the love I had for Jessica and the insatiable desire for power that Samantha promised me. The tension was rising between us, and I knew I could no longer delay the truth. Jessica was determined to discover the source of all the secrets, and I was playing in a minefield. With each passing day, the doubt consumed her more and more, and I wondered if I could maintain control over the situation. At that moment, I realized that the life I had been trying to build was about to fall apart, and I could only hope that the cards I had played wouldn't turn against me. The air was thick in the living room when I decided to confront my father, Henry. I knew he kept secrets, and the inheritance I had just received felt more like a curse than a blessing. Soft late afternoon light streamed in through the windows, creating dancing shadows on the walls, but the atmosphere was far from tranquil. Our family memories, a tapestry of smiles and love, now seemed entangled in a scandal that threatened everything we knew. "Dad, we need to talk," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Henry was sitting on his leather couch, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "About what, Jessica?" he replied, taking a sip and placing the glass on the table with a thud that reverberated in the silent room. "About the inheritance. I discovered some things that worry me," I said, trying to find the right words. "Our family fortune, how it was built. It's not all it seems, is it?" He sighed, a mixture of resignation and tiredness spreading across his face. "You shouldn't worry about that, my daughter. An inheritance is a gift. You should focus on enjoying it, not questioning it." "But I need to understand. What happened to the fortune? What secrets did you and Mom keep from me?" I insisted, my voice growing in intensity. "I can't just ignore this, Dad." Henry stood up, his expression of frustration now evident. "Jessica, you don't know what you're talking about. There are things that are better left in the past. I did what I did to protect you and your mother." "Protect? Or protect your reputation?" I countered, my heart racing. "I have the right to know the truth." He hesitated, eyes darting away. "Very well. But know that the truth can be painful." "I'm willing to listen," I said, taking a deep breath as he sat down again, this time closer to me, as if the proximity might soften what he was about to reveal. "Inheritance, it was built on difficult decisions, Jessica. Some of it is a burden we carry. What you don't know is that some of it comes from dealings that weren't exactly clean. Your grandfather did things which he is proud of. But he also made enemies. Enemies that are still out there." "Are you saying that the fortune is stained with blood?" I whispered, horrified. "What kind of legacy is this?" "A legacy that will bring you power, but also enemies. That's why I always wanted you to stay away from this world. Fortune can attract greed and betrayal, and you're already seeing that with your husband." "What do you mean by that?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine at the thought of Mark. "Do you think he's using me?" "Jessica, you need to be cautious. There are people around you who do not have good intentions. Mark, he is an ambitious man. Don't let wealth blind you." My father's words echoed in my mind, and a wave of distrust began to form. "I can't believe you're telling me this now, Dad. I thought he was the right person." "I know, but sometimes appearances can be deceiving. You need to open your eyes, Jessica. Ambition can turn into betrayal, and I don't want you to fall into that trap. You don't know anything about what's going on between us." I retorted, feeling anger and frustration boiling inside me. "You don't know how he treats me." "I know more than you know," he said, his voice deep. "And if you're not careful, you could end up losing not only your fortune, but yourself as well." As my father's words stuck in my mind, a sense of anguish overcame me. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Mark's image, which had once seemed so safe and loving, was now tainted with doubt. And Samantha, his lover, hovered in my head like a shadow, manipulative and ambitious. "I need some time to think," I said, standing up abruptly. "Jessica, please don't rush into making decisions." "Think clearly," he replied, but I was already leaving the room, my mind racing with Henry's revelations. As I walked outside, the weight of the inheritance felt even more oppressive. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, and I knew I needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. Fate was approaching, and I was about to enter into an inevitable confrontation, not just with Mark, but with myself. The air was thick in the meeting room, and the tension was palpable. I was just minutes away from exposing the truth about the inheritance, and adrenaline was pumping through my veins. The look on my family's faces, a combination of expectation and fear, made me feel like I was about to step into a minefield. As I arranged the papers in front of me, my mind wandered to everything that had happened. How did I get to this point? What had Mark done to me? Are you ready, sweetheart? My father Henry's voice echoed in the room, pulling me back to reality. He seemed calm, but I knew his mind was working a mile a minute. Yes, Dad. I just need a moment, I replied, trying to gather my courage. The plan I had worked out with Henry over the past few days was about to be put into practice, and the idea of finally revealing the truth made me both anxious and relieved. When everyone finally settled down, I looked at each of the faces around the table. My hands were shaking slightly, but I took a deep breath and began. I thank everyone for being here today. I have something important to share about our family heritage. The room fell silent, and I knew I had everyone's attention. In the last few days, I have discovered information that completely changes the perspective on the fortune we are about to receive. The tension increased, and I could feel the stares intensifying. Mark was there, in the corner, with a nervous smile on his face. He seemed confident, but I knew it was just a facade. What do you mean, Jess? He interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. I mean that inheritance is not just a matter of fortune. There is a scandal involved that could ruin us all, I stated, looking directly at him. I discovered that for years the fortune was built on lies, fraud, and corruption. The money we are about to receive is tainted. Mark tried to divert attention. This is ridiculous. Jessica, you're just confused. We can't believe everything we hear, he said, his voice rising. But I wasn't going to be intimidated. I'm not confused, Mark. I learned all of this from documents I found. You can't manipulate me anymore, I replied, my voice firm. Indignation grew inside me. And it was at that moment that Samantha entered the room. She was dressed stunningly, with a triumphant look that sent a chill down my spine. Sorry I'm late, guys, she said, with a smile that seemed forced. Looks like I missed the party. You shouldn't be here, Mark said quickly, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. But it was too late. Samantha had arrived, and her presence would change everything. Actually, I came to clarify a few things, she began, her gaze settling on me. Jessica, you're not the only one who knows secrets. I know the truth about you and Mark, and I'm here to expose it. The silence in the room was deafening. Are you saying you know about our relationship? I asked, trying to control the anger that was boiling inside me. Not just that, she continued, taking a few steps forward. I know about Mark's plans and his desire to manipulate your inheritance. He wanted you to believe it was your fault, so that you would feel obligated to give up everything. This is a lie. Mark shouted, but his voice no longer had the same strength. Panic began to spread across his face, and I could see he was losing control. You can't hide the truth anymore, Mark, Samantha said, her voice now full of disdain. The whole family is here, and it's time for everyone to know what really happened. The room was in a frenzy. Horrified looks turned to Mark, and I knew his game was up. You can't do this, Samantha, he pleaded, his mask of confidence crumbling. I can and I will, she replied, her voice firm. And you will pay for everything. I felt light, as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Mark no longer had control over me, and now everyone would see his true face. The truth was finally out, and I was ready to face the consequences. I felt my heart throb in my chest as I watched the room filled with familiar faces, all of them turning to me with expressions of expectation and suspicion. The family reunion, which was supposed to be a time of celebration and unity, had turned into a battlefield. I had decided it was time to put all my cards on the table, not only to protect the inheritance that now belonged to me, but to expose Mark and Samantha's betrayal. Jessica, are you really sure about this? My mother asked, concern written all over her face. I could see the anxiety in his eyes, and it only strengthened my resolve. Yes, Mom. It's the only way to clear this all up, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The murmur in the room increased as I stood up. Henry, my father, was sitting in the corner, his expression mixed with pride and expectation. He also knew about the betrayal, and now was our chance to expose Mark. I would like to draw everyone's attention to a serious matter, I began, my voice echoing in the sudden silence that followed. Over the past few months, my husband, Mark, has been behaving strangely. He has been trying to manipulate me and take advantage of my heritage, and I can no longer remain silent. Mark stood in front of me, his expression of contempt and anger slowly turning to confusion. You are crazy, Jessica. This is all in your head. He stood up, gesturing exaggeratedly. You can't just throw these accusations around without proof. Evidences? I laughed, a bitter laugh. What about your lover, Samantha? Did you really think I wouldn't find out? The silence in the room had become palpable. Samantha, who until then had remained in a corner, finally spoke out. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Jessica. This is ridiculous." His voice was filled with nervousness, but I could see the desperation in his eyes. "Ridiculous? Or perhaps it is the truth you fear," I said, looking directly at her. "I saw the messages, I heard about the plans. You and Mark wanted to destroy me for my fortune." At this moment, Henry stood up. "Jessica is right. I am witness to Mark's intentions. He wanted to control the inheritance and manipulate us all. I set a trap to expose you, and now is the time to reveal everything." The murmurs in the room increased, and the tension intensified. Mark was clearly losing control of the situation. "You can't do that, Dad," he shouted, frustration in his voice. "That's a personal attack." "It's not an attack, it's a defense," Henry said firmly. "You betrayed the trust of your wife and our family. And now, you will pay for it." The door opened abruptly, and the police entered the room. I couldn't believe what was happening. "Mark Thompson, you are under arrest for fraud and conspiracy," said one of the officers, as others addressed Samantha. She looked at me, her face pale. "You cannot do that," he shouted, his voice echoing with desperation. "We had a plan. And now that plan has become your undoing," I replied, feeling a wave of relief course through my body. As Mark and Samantha were led away, a sense of freedom came over me. I was finally free from the clutches of betrayal. I looked at my father, who was watching me with pride. "You did what was right, my daughter," he said, and his gaze filled me with strength. At that moment, I knew that the inheritance, now free from manipulation and betrayal, could be used in the best possible way. It was time to rebuild my life, to think about how I could help my family and do something meaningful with it. Fortune that was once a source of discord would now become a tool for justice and renewal. With a deep sigh, I realized that the road ahead would be challenging, but now, I had the courage and determination needed to weather any storm. I was able to take the reins of my life, and finally, the future looked promising.